Hello everyone, welcome to my Batman Arkham Knight, Knightmare difficulty, no damage walkthrough. We'll be unlocking Founders Island in this video as part of the main story. And if you've been keeping up with my channel, you'll understand that recently I've been playing a new game and doing a blind playthrough for it, and it is for Dying Light 2. And I wanted to do this walkthrough after playing Dying Light 2 because currently I'm at a point in Dying Light 2 where I'm trying to grind for XP and I'm trying to farm for inhibitors in order to gain access to all the combat and parkour abilities that is supposed to make Dying Light an interesting game. But it appears, in Dying Light 2's case, that game embraces a lot of mindless grinding compared to Dying Light 1, and XP gainage feels even more inconsistent in Dying Light 2 than in Dying Light 1, and I'm just having to waste time just staying at night, dealing with a bunch of infected, farming for XP, trying to farm for inhibitors. It's just a waste of time. And I think I was at a point in my blind playthrough where I just didn't know what to say. I didn't know what kind of commentary to really say for my blind playthrough to really make the videos intriguing. And that's why I decided to take a break from that and just do this walkthrough. And I really have a better appreciation for doing commentary on pre-recorded videos rather than doing live commentary, because the whole pressures of live commentary with actually trying to say something to avoid all the silence, it is a lot compared to doing commentary for a pre-recorded video like this. So that is why I'm doing this part of the walkthrough, and I will say though, Batman Arkham Knight, I'm just glad to be back in this game compared to Dying Light 2, because I find the world in Dying Light 2 to be very boring at the moment. And Batman Arkham Knight, at least coming to this game and just staring at it, feels better than playing through Dying Light 2 right now. And I know it sounds overly negative towards Dying Light 2, but to be fair though, I wasn't really expecting much from Dying Light 2, because Dying Light 1 was kind of average at best, and it wasn't really that exceptional with its world or with its mechanics. I mean, it was better than Dead Island, that's for sure. But yeah, Dying Light 2 just seems to be following the same trend with Dying Light 1. And that is why coming to this video and doing commentary for Batman Arkham Knight feels a lot more pleasing now that I've actually done a bit of Dying Light 2 so far. So that is just my update. But in this video, like I said before, we're going to be unlocking Founders Island, finally. And we're doing some side missions, we're doing some APC side missions, and we'll also be encountering Two-Face in this video as part of a side mission. And I like Two-Face's side mission. I mean, I'm not a fan of the dialogue, and I do find that his dialogue where he's just blaming Batman for becoming who he was, it just feels out of nowhere, and it's like, why is he talking about this right now? It just feels like a very forced dialogue, if you ask me. But the gameplay part of Two-Face's side mission is a lot of fun because it's 3 Massive Predator encounters. And the 3rd Predator encounter is where it gets interesting when we actually do Two-Face's boss fight. And we're actually dealing with the militia, because I have some really fun strategies for that sequence, and you'll be seeing dive bombing at its most broken level by far, because dive bombing in Arkham City, Arkham Origins, and Arkham Knight is so powerful in Predator encounters if you know how to use it correctly. And you actually isolate enemies easily with dive bombing compared to using the likes of knockdown smashes or other noisy elements. And that is what you're going to be seeing when you get to that Predator encounter. And one thing that I do find very funny about that Predator encounter with Two-Face is he goes down after a single hit from a silent takedown or any other takedown animation. Yet in Batman Arkham City, and this was a really stupid design choice, he had a health bar. So regardless of what kind of takedown animation you did, he would not be incapacitated instantly. He would just lose a bit of his health and then force you to beat him down by just mashing square on him. And it just looked so stupid. It was Occam's razor at its worst. But that is not the case with this side mission right here, and it was the exact same kind of format they had in Harley Quinn's Revenge as well, where she had a health bar, and all it did was just drag out the encounter, and it was just a waste of time. It was an absolute waste of time. So it's good that he just goes down like any other thug, because he really doesn't seem any different to other thugs in his physiology or the like. So yeah, that's all I have to say about that. And then we'll also be doing one of the Season of Infamy DLC packs, which is Killer Croc. And as much as I do like the way Killer Croc looks, and I really dig the way he looks more crocodile-like, and I like his tail, I like his stomach, I just like the way he looks overall. He's just a reskin of Albert King's boss fight, and again, the entire format of the story doesn't actually complement the main story. Nothing happens in Killer Croc's DLC that feels like it has any impact on the story, or it actually feels like it's a new element to add to the main story. It's just a very isolated story that has nothing to do with what's happening with the malicious occupation of Gotham City, with Scarecrow's plan. It's just a throwaway story. It's pretty throwaway, and they made Croc feel very throwaway with the fact that he's the reskin of Albert King's boss fight, where it's more about building up your dual team takedown, using it against him until his health bar depletes, and that's it. They even have the whole format where you do a beatdown on Albert King, and then you counter him at certain points. It's all entirely reused. It's the exact same problem that I had with Harley Quinn's Revenge, where a lot of assets from the main game of Batman Arkham City, with section designs, with enemy designs, with contrived sections, with lack of unique scenarios, it's all there in Killer Croc's boss fight, and it's on a similar degree to Harley Quinn's Revenge. And Harley Quinn's Revenge is one of the worst DLCs I've ever played. If you've seen my walkthrough, you'll understand how overly negative I am to that DLC, because objectively, it's just a very lazy DLC. It does absolutely nothing to add to the story of Arkham City. It doesn't build towards events in Batman Arkham Knight. It reuses a lot of quest formats from Batman Arkham City, but to a lazier degree. It also has a couple of bugs, and it's just boring. It's so boring. It doesn't even have the same level of difficulty as New Game Plus. It's that simple. Like, where is the replay value with that DLC? And the storytelling, like, with making Robin just seemingly die at the end when he's just all right. Like, you can't put in a kind of major character death like that in a DLC, so what was the whole point of that? It makes no sense. Like, it's a throwaway piece of content. And it's sadly the same case with Killer Croc, and that's what I have to say about Killer Croc for the moment before we get to this DLC. But right now, I'm just doing some of these watchtowers and checkpoints right here. And I'm going to actually go on a different tangent. I'm going to talk about two videos that I watched related to Batman Arkham Knight. So there's a guy by the name of Godzilla Mendoza who made a video called Arkham Knight's Horrendous Storytelling, where he goes into a lot of detail in an almost comedic fashion about Batman Arkham Knight's bad storytelling, and a lot of the times where the characters say things that don't make any sense, and then just the way the events play out don't make any sense as well. Like, he felt the same way as me when it came to the likes of Joker's Blood, because I mentioned before in my Batman Arkham City walkthrough that the whole idea of Joker's consciousness manifesting through the blood that Batman supposedly cured in Batman Arkham City through Ra's al Ghul's blood, which was, by the way, imbued with the powers of Lazarus, which was seemingly like the fountain of youth. Like, it makes no sense that Joker's consciousness would be manifesting through a blood disease. That's not how consciousness works. And, you know, he said that it was only done this way to complement the whole idea that the Arkham games have to make Joker the main villain, and because of the fact that Rocksteady is trying to maintain this whole model, that's what led to this very odd choice in storytelling. And also, he added some additional elements to that really poor choice in storytelling. Like, you know, in Batman Arkham Origins, and really in the comic series in general, the Joker's origins have always been made out to be one bad day is all it takes to create the Joker. But then when you relegate it to a genetic condition through a blood disease, then it really destroys the whole meaning behind that phrase of one bad day is all it takes to make the Joker. Like, it destroys any sense of uniqueness that the Joker has in being a very unique kind of villain. When you relegate it to a blood disease, and by simply having his blood, you become the Joker, and therefore you develop his memories, and then you're able to say things like bats, when no one else should really be aware of the idea that Joker calls him bats, and all these other things that don't make any sense. Like, he somehow maintains the memories he had from his first time fighting Batman to Arkham City, and it's like his consciousness is living after his death. Yeah, I totally agree with Godzilla Mendoza that it destroys any sense of uniqueness to Joker. And the thing is that in Batman Arkham Origins, they established this whole idea of one bad day being all it took to make Joker who he was. So that is what made Joker a very unique villain, but then when you relegate it to a blood disease and anyone that has it just becomes the Joker, it destroys any sense of uniqueness. And I thought it was a very interesting perspective that Godzilla Mendoza maintained. And then he talked a lot about the way certain side characters were used, and it's like, where are these side characters when Batman is getting unmasked by Scarecrow, and the way Batman acts during his encounter with Scarecrow at the end of the game feels so out of character. And really, I felt the same way as well. Like, Scarecrow has a gun and 2 hostages. Just the framework for that is very similar to the typical hostage taker, and we've dealt with a lot of scenarios in the Predator sequences of the Arkham games where a bunch of thugs have a hostage, and then we have to silently eliminate them and actually incapacitate them in order to rescue the hostage. And really, this feels like a very similar scenario. And it just think as well, like, to unmask Batman, all you had to do was capture a bunch of hostages, use a pistol, bring him to a secure location, and that was it. When it just feels like the kind of thing that any villain could have done. And then Godzilla Mendoza highlighted a lot of the absurdities in Scarecrow's plans and how it just seemed like he always had a backup plan. And then, like, the whole idea that at the beginning, when Scarecrow was trying to use Ace Chemicals to poison the entire eastern seaboard, like, the fact that he was preparing for that with the cloudburst, and then the game almost makes it seem like that the cloudburst was what he was actually building towards, not the actual contamination of the entire eastern seaboard with the choice of dialogue. You know, I totally understand that point as well. And then he also made an interesting statement in response to a developer's comment before Batman Arkham Knight released. And Godzilla Mendoza said they let their feelings for the game bleed into the actual story of the game, because one of the developers, before Arkham Knight released, he almost implied that he wanted Batman Arkham Knight to be the last game in the series. And, you know, he talked a lot about the Batmobile kind of serving as one of those final mechanics as part of the final game. And it almost made it seem like they were done developing Batman games for the Arkham series. So, because they already had those feelings of making Batman Arkham Knight the last game in the series, they let those feelings bleed into the story of Batman Arkham Knight, and that's why the final part of the game has story problems, where Batman feels so out of character with the way he handles the situation with Scarecrow. It's like he's forgotten all those times where he's been in a similar situation, and, you know, he doesn't have any kind of spare gear hidden in his suit like what we see in the Batman animated series that are completely outside of his utility belt. Like, all we see before Batman surrenders himself to Scarecrow is he takes off his utility belt, but nothing else. He doesn't have any other hidden compartments for gadgets inside of his suit. And so, like, the utility belt is what makes the man, nothing else. Like, I do agree with Godzilla Mendoza that does seem a little silly, and I did find, like, the whole idea of Scarecrow managing to put Batman into a position where he's forced to unmask himself by just simply capturing 2 people, just through such a simple process like that, to be kind of hard to comprehend. And then, like, his whole idea of the ending as well, with that bat that you see at the end, that it almost gives the impression that someone is using fear toxin. Like, everyone I see just says, oh, it's due to fear toxin, as if Batman would actually resort to that. But Batman would never resort to using fear toxin to create a legend in the minds of all these thugs, because then it just make him no different to Scarecrow. He'd be no different to the coward that Scarecrow is. So why would Batman ever resort to that? And the only reason they made that ending as such, and the only reason it has that kind of coloration, is because they had the assets for the Knightmare Batman in Scarecrow's hallucination when he was injected with his fear toxin, and they just decided to use that as the Knightmare Batman without fully comprehending the idea that so many fans will think that Batman is using fear toxin. And if he's being no different to the cowardly lot of criminals that he's dealing with by relying upon such cheap substitutes rather than his actual skills as a crime fighter, then that just makes the ending feel even more stupid. And the only reason they set it up as such is to just conclude Batman Arkham Knight in a way that felt very unsatisfactory. I mean, in the moment, it's really cool that Batman finally conquers fear. And that's another thing as well. Like, this whole idea that Joker's Titan-infected blood is what's actually causing his consciousness to manifest in Batman. Somehow Batman neutralizes that when Scarecrow injects him with the fear toxin. I mean, I can understand Batman conquering the mental side of that, but the physical side of that, I mean, having Joker's infected blood, I mean, especially the Titan, the Titan causes physical degradation, and it leads to eventual death. That's what we've seen with the Joker, but then somehow these 4 individuals that were completely lost on hospital records just didn't die from Joker's Titan-infected blood, and they instead adopted a form of Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, where the prion misfolded in a way to allow Joker's consciousness to manifest through the blood. That's very, very confusing, because, as Godzilla Mendoza said, fuck consistency, because Batman Arkham Knight is filled with a lot of inconsistent moments with his storytelling. And then he talked about the Arkham Knight, and no surprises there. He talks a lot of crap about the Arkham Knight, which I do agree with, that the storytelling to indicate that Jason Todd was the Arkham Knight was very heavy-handed and very forceful in trying to get the player to realize that Jason Todd was the Arkham Knight. I mean, why is Batman having these hallucinations of events that he wasn't even a part of at this kind of moment in the story? It's bad. It's really bad. And then with the way Jason Todd is portrayed, where he's just kind of like a whiny kid, and you're telling me that Batman never tried to find Jason's body when Jason was being shot by Joker in that abandoned wing of Arkham. Like, in the comics, apparently Joker killed Jason in Africa, and even though it was so far away from Batman, Batman actually went out of his way to go and find Jason. Yet, Godzilla Mendoza mentioned that in a building that is so close to where Batman is operating, which is Arkham Asylum, Batman never ever bothered going to Arkham Asylum to get Jason's body, or at least investigate where he was. Yeah, Godzilla Mendoza felt so insulted by the way they ruined Batman's character in Batman Arkham Knight, and I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised that he feels that way, because a lot of people did feel very, very conflicted with Batman Arkham Knight as a whole, how it was a very unsatisfactory ending for the Arkham series, and I already had these thoughts before, but to actually have someone else put to words a lot of the thoughts that I just really couldn't summarize for myself was quite refreshing to see. And despite the fact that it does favor a comedic tone with the choice of commentary, it was a pretty good video. It preserved a level of seriousness with the way he was detailing a lot of his thoughts on the story of Batman Arkham Knight. And yeah, I gave a like. And it was definitely a video I was going to potentially do a reaction video to, because, you know, it was very interesting. But that was one of the videos that I saw related to Batman Arkham Knight. And then another YouTuber by the name of LaserZ, who I've already talked about before as being a guy who does a lot of Assassin's Creed content, especially of the older games. He did a video on the Arkham series as a whole with the retrospective. I mean, it wasn't as detailed as Godzilla Mendoza's thoughts on Batman Arkham Knight's storytelling. I mean, he just kind of gave some thoughts on the actual Arkham games, and he talked more about the development of those games rather than actually analyzing those games as a whole on their story levels, on their gameplay levels. But he actually liked certain parts about Batman Arkham Knight, even though a lot of those don't really make any sense. And he likes Origins, which is good, because Origins is my favorite game of the series, and you know, a lot of the thoughts he had about Origins were kind of in line with what I had about Origins as well. But his thoughts on Arkham Knight are a little too positive, if you ask me. I mean, he does agree that the Arkham Knight's reveal doesn't make any sense, and he does agree that, you know, the Joker's consciousness manifesting through the blood is very absurd. But when you look past that, you know, he does appreciate the character dynamics provided by Batman and Joker, and just their relationship coming together like this. But I think he was a little too partial towards the ending of the game. I think he was a little too positive, if you ask me. I kind of wish he was a little bit harder on the ending, because the ending of Batman Arkham Knight doesn't feel like a very satisfying ending for the series. And with just what I've discussed so far, and with what Godzilla Mendoza has discussed, I really feel like they could have done so much better. And Godzilla Mendoza did mention that a lot of these problems feel like they could have easily been fixed by Rocksteady. They actually had the foresight to realize what was going to happen with their choice of storytelling. But sadly, these issues that I've already discussed are magnified by the fact that Rocksteady didn't really comprehend what they were doing with the storytelling for Batman Arkham Knight, and they were just trying to follow the same trend that they were doing with the rest of the Batman games, where, you know, they have to make Joker a central villain, and therefore a lot of Batman's rogues gallery just feels kind of idiotic with their choice of dialogue or with their choice of action. And what I've discussed with Scarecrow and just the fact that he's such a different character to how he is in Batman Arkham Asylum. I mean, Godzilla Mendoza felt the same way as well. Like, it really felt like Scarecrow in Batman Arkham Asylum was a total maniac, just very obsessed with fear. But in Batman Arkham Knight, it's such a 180 in his character, where he does feel like a more calculating villain, and he just seems less maniacal, but just a lot more like a terrorist. And it just seems rather odd that they could favor this kind of 180 in character development. And it was one of the most off-putting things about Batman Arkham Knight Scarecrow. And it's the same with other characters as well, like Poison Ivy. Poison Ivy on this game feels so different to how she's actually portrayed in Batman Arkham Asylum and City. In those games, it really felt like she was completely taken over by the plant's influence. Like her powers had manifested so much that it just overwhelmed her, and her human side never really showed up, and she just sounded like a crazy person. And like someone who's like a religious zealot on that similar kind of level, but somehow in Batman Arkham Knight, she has like a sassy attitude to her, very similar to Catwoman, and she seems to have like a more human side to her, when it's like you're completely discarding the way her character was portrayed in Batman Arkham Asylum and Batman Arkham City. I mean, her sacrifice scene was interesting, and it definitely complemented the idea of Batman sparing a lot of the criminals so that they would redeem themselves. It was interesting like that, but some people say that it was a little forced. And, with what I've just discussed so far, with how different Poison Ivy's character is in Batman Arkham Knight, one could make the argument that her sacrifice scene was kind of forced because of this change in character. And yeah, it's hard to disagree with that point, and I do understand that greatly. And that's definitely one of the main problems that Arkham Knight has. It's just there's not really a lot of moments where characters say things that make sense. And with what I've just discussed with Two-Face so far, like Two-Face is randomly talking about the events that led to his creation, and that he's blaming Batman. Yet we've never really seen this displayed very well in Batman Arkham City. It's confusing. It's pretty confusing on that level. And I feel like Rocksteady only did it that way to serve as payoff to the idea that this would be the final Arkham game, and so they wanted to end a lot of villain arcs with some kind of conclusion. Like with the identity theft mission, for instance, where like Batman's talking so much with Hush that he finally understands why Hush is doing what he's doing, but at the same time, Hush's ambitions don't make any sense with the way it's portrayed in Batman Arkham Knight. He set up everything so that he could steal the faces off of individuals, go through intense surgeries just to walk past a receptionist desk and steal money. And it's just not properly portrayed in the gameplay in a way that properly complements his ambitions that were set up in Batman Arkham City. It's very confusing in that regard. And then we have like the Two-Face arc, where it seems like he's talking about the events that led up to his creation, sort of as a way for the developers to complement the whole idea that this is the final Arkham game, and they wanted to kind of send off Two-Face's character by having him talk about events that led up to his creation. I mean, this isn't done so much with Penguin, and Penguin is pretty forgettable in this game. And like a lot of Batman's allies as well aren't even partaking in what is happening in Gotham City at the time, so like what are they doing the whole entire time? And it's just done this way so that Batman is always on his own, just to complement this whole idea that Batman is a loner. And Batman's strength lies in the fact that he has no allies and that he likes to be a loner, when in actuality, Batman Arkham Origins tried to establish that Bruce is a man, not an island. Alfred said this many times before, but eventually Batman is able to trust Commissioner Gordon and the police enough to actually work with them to stop the Joker's rampage through Blackgate. And that served as an important form of character development for Batman in Batman Arkham Origins. But, given that Warner Brothers was setting this game up before Batman Arkham Knight, given that Arkham Origins released before Batman Arkham Knight, it really felt like Arkham Knight was going to touch a bit upon this. And, they even set up trailers for Batman's allies being targeted by the villains, and so it would make it seem like Batman would actually be working with his allies in the main story, when it's just they're regulated to side missions and DLC, and Batman's constantly alone. And it's probably all done this way as well to serve as payoff for the fact that Jason Todd was the Arkham Knight, because maybe the whole event of Batman remembering Jason prevented him from actually working with his allies because he didn't want them to suffer the same way that Jason did, which again is very poor storytelling, because why is he thinking of Jason out of nowhere? Which to that, Godzilla Mendoza said, it's like pants on the head levels of stupidity. And going back to my main point, I don't really know if I like Laser Z's retrospective video on the Batman Arkham series. I think he's a little too positive towards certain games. And he said that the way the villains were handled in Batman Arkham City with tying into the main story was flawless. When a lot of the times it really feels like the game flip-flops between Ra's al Ghul's arc, Protocol 10's arc, and then Joker's arc. And, you know, you just go to these areas just because some villain has another villain that is working on a cure for Joker's condition, and then this actually leads on to Protocol 10 and also Ra's al Ghul's arc, and, you know, it just feels like happy accidents, in my opinion, more so than clever storytelling, so I don't really agree with Laser Z's retrospective video. I mean, I haven't watched the full thing. I'm not too sure what other concluding remarks he gave. I mean, I have seen up to the point where he's talking about Batman Arkham Knight, but I don't know if it's one of his best videos. His Assassin's Creed videos were way better than what was portrayed in his Arkham series retrospective video. So that's what I have to say about that. And that's all the tangents I have to discuss at the moment until more come to mind. But right now we're doing the Two-Face side mission, and we just did the first one, and now we're doing the second bank. And this part right here was pretty sloppy. So the way Two-Face's Predator missions work is initially the alarm is going to be sounding, and the game will task you to incapacitate a certain number of henchmen before Two-Face cuts the alarm, and you have to remain silent. As long as the alarm is sounding, you're free to do loud takedowns, and the thugs will not be alerted to your position. But as soon as the alarm stops sounding, you have to remain silent, otherwise your loud takedowns will make noise and they'll lure enemies to your position, just like the normal Predator encounters. And there's plenty of opportunities here to use the remote hacking device on the escalators or on the chandeliers in order to take down certain thugs, or to use the floor grates, or to isolate other enemies. And I really think this is one of the stronger Predator encounters in the game. It's a big environment right here. It's an entirely linear environment. And there's a lot of opportunities to do creative things within this Predator encounter, and it's done really well. It's a lot better than the other Predator encounters, I would say, and it sucks that they had to reserve one of the best Predator encounters for side missions instead. But we're at the final bank right here, and it seems odd that they don't make Founders Island the last bank you have to go to, because, you know, like the order of hierarchy with the way the islands are laid out is like Bleak Island feels like the lowest tier island, Miyagani's the middle tier, and then Founders Island is the higher tiered island. Yet they make it where the banks you go to are in the order of Bleak Island, Founders Island, and then Miyagani Island, which coincidentally allows you to make Two-Face the first villain that you put in prison. If only this was the same case with other villains like Professor Pig, and I didn't have to suffer through Batman's insensitive nature with saying, oh, I need the Batmobile to deal with Valentine, when he could easily stop him at any point from torturing victims. So currently at this moment, Laszlo Valentine is torturing people, turning them into Dollatrons, and Batman, even though he's found where he is, just says he needs the Batmobile, so more victims are going to be dying because Batman is apparently incapable of dealing with Valentine without the Batmobile, which goes to show his dependency on the Batmobile in this game compared to the other games, and is all as a massive payoff to the idea that the Batmobile is such a crucial element to the gameplay and that fans wanted it. That was the main reason why the Batmobile was so forced into this game. It's so funny, but at the same time, definitely a major consequence of trying to satisfy those headlines that were already established before the game released. But this is the final bank. This is the one where the Predator encounters can be pretty tricky because there are a lot of enemies here. And I'm using the Bat Claw plus the Slam ability in order to take out most of these guys. And there's no telling where some of these guys choose to go, so that's why you gotta be very fast when you're taking down certain henchmen. And just don't try to rush in too much, because if you think one guy is going to go one way, he'll most likely turn in a certain way that will cut you off, and he'll be able to attack you when you're busy trying to deal with other enemies. So you got to bear that in mind with this initial Predator phase. And there's plenty of opportunities here to be very creative. Like I mentioned before, you can use the remote hacking device to your advantage during these sequences. You can use it on escalators, you can use it on chandeliers, you can use it on gates to stop the enemies from moving. And you can also activate smoke that will allow you to blind the enemies and take them out while they're inside of the smoke, which is really cool. Like there's so many opportunities to be very creative during this Predator encounter that you just don't get in a lot of the main Predator encounters. That's at least my interpretation of it. I wonder if you guys feel differently about a lot of the main Predator encounters, but I just really feel like this is one of the few Predator encounters that just offers you so much to do. But that is the end of this phase, and now we have this final phase, and this is Two-Face's boss fight. So he has militia members supporting him, and weirdly, these enemies, some of them have optic deflection armor, and in the main story, we don't get introduced to optic deflection armor until the Arkham Knight's boss fight. So, without that introduction, if you go into Two-Face's boss fight and you're dealing with these optic deflection armor enemies, how will you know what the optic deflection armor does? They just don't show up in Detective Vision, right? Or maybe it's just they only show up on New Game Plus. I don't know what happens on the original New Game, like what kind of enemy arrangement is favored for a Two-Face's boss fight, but it just seems a little odd that they would introduce the optic deflection armor here without any proper introduction in some of the initial main missions. And I just find it very odd how little the optic deflection armor is used. We see it for this Predator encounter here. We see it in Mr. Freeze's side mission, and then we see it for the Arkham Knight's boss fight, and that's really the only main story encounter, but it really feels like the optic deflection armor was a chance to really add a new layer of challenge to the Predator encounters, but Rocksteady didn't really go through with it for whatever reason. It's rather confusing, and I feel like they could have changed up the flow of gameplay, and I wanted to do something very interesting here for this boss fight as well. I wanted to not use the Fear Takedown. I wanted to showcase the power of dive bombing here, and occasionally I'm just not using Detective Vision. And I guess one of the main reasons for that is because of the fact that I'm using this isolated area here, and a lot of these enemies have optic deflection armor. So, like, the optic deflection armor just kind of forces you to play the game in a way that you've probably never done before. And that right there, did you see that? Why did Batman prioritize the furthest vent when that vent over there was closer to him? As much as I do like the ability to enter floor grates at a distance, the times when Batman prioritizes the wrong grate, and, like, I could have been spotted by an enemy had they actually been investigating the knockdown smash. That was pretty bad just then. But again, like, the enemies are so keen on trying to investigate the noise generated by the dive bomb more so than any other noisy takedowns that you do, that this is the most overpowered way to make noise and actually lure enemies. And also right there, I was saving the explosive gel until that guy right there, because if I were to use it early, they would have probably shot the explosive gel. I mean, in a lot of my earlier playthroughs of this particular Predator mission, the enemies just ran past the explosive gel, not even bothering to shoot it after I used it one time on one guy. So I'm guessing when you use it around corners or when you place it on that particular part of the floor, they don't try to shoot it because it's not within their field of view. Ooh, and also, this is very interesting. I like this little piece of detail right here. If you get behind a guy using a detective mode scanner and he just finishes his animation, he'll do a unique animation where he turns around and he's like, this doesn't make any sense. It says he's right behind me. And the first time I saw this, it was through some other person's video where he was showcasing these moments where you just get behind him and he does that quote. And I was genuinely surprised, and I left a comment, and that comment has received a lot of likes because a lot of people didn't realize it. It was pretty funny seeing that. But then I just deliver the final blow to Two-Face and just give him an unceremonious end by just using the escalator to take him out. And we put him in prison, and we now have the main story to do right here. So we have a drone encounter underneath Wayne Tower, and I'm going to try to get to a better position where the enemies are not going to surround me on all sides. However, this was presenting with certain problems. The first problem was getting away from the enemies. Getting away from the enemies, I had to remain in battle mode to actually see the path that the projectiles were taking. If you go into chase mode, in the middle of these combat encounters with the drones, you cannot see the path that their projectiles are taking, which is dumb. And ironically, during the APC chases, you can see the path that the rocket launchers are shooting at even when you're in chase mode, and you can also see it in battle mode as well. So why there is a different piece of programming involved with the militia APCs, and it's not the same piece of programming that is involved with the drones, is very confusing. The second problem I was encountering is this part of the area right over here. So this is an area where thugs driving cars can actually pass through, and the game has a problem with its main weapon system. You see, the 60mm cannon and the riot rounds that you use against the normal henchmen, they're mapped to the same button. And you'll notice that the reticle right now is in the plus sign, meaning that it's prioritizing the 60mm cannon. Well, there's a different reticle style that indicates that the game is automatically prioritizing the riot rounds that you use against normal henchmen. And the thing is that the game always defaults to the riot rounds if Batman is dealing with henchmen or he's dealing with enemies that are driving vehicles, like enemies that are actually in the vehicles. Obviously, it's not going to be the case with these drones because they're unmanned. But the problem I was encountering was when cars were passing through and they were right next to drones, I would get times where I was trying to shoot the drone and the game would prioritize the wrong weapon, so I'd be firing riot rounds at the drones and it does no damage when I was trying to use the 60mm cannon because it's an automatic process. So that is a really annoying issue with the game, and I don't really understand how Rocksteady could have missed it. I mean, were they really expecting people to sit in this whole entire area and just let the enemy surround them? Like, trying to stay in this area is annoying because the enemies surround you, there's no guarantee you'll get out of the line of fire, and you have to wait for your secondary weapon energy to charge at the right moment so that you can then use it. Like, there's too many random variables with that, which is why I wanted to get to a better spot. But even if you're moving to a better position, it's going to be random, because one thing I don't like about any of these combat encounters with the drones is the way the drones spawn into the map. The drones have a spawn logic where they will spawn off camera, they'll spawn right behind you and to your sides, and they'll spawn around corners in order to give the illusion that they're actually coming from that corner, and not that they're just spawning out of thin air. But oftentimes they spawn out of thin air in places where it really doesn't make any sense for them to do so. And so it just gives them an unfair advantage to get behind you even when you're in a strategic position. And even when you're not even trying to use it, the times where they just spawn behind you or in an unfavorable position because of the fact that this spawn logic is practically like a cheating AI for them, it's really bullshit. It's pretty bullshit. So you have got to bear that in mind when you're trying to get to strategic positions in order to deal with the drones. But I'm trying to finish off the remaining drones on Miyagani Island, and now we're just going to be looking for the routes. So you just gotta tap L3 to fire the sonar, and then once you get right on top of the red area, you gotta hold L3 to actually fully charge the sonar, and you'll be able to get the plant out of the ground. And then we have this little combat encounter right here, where you're gonna be seeing this mechanic right here. So that mechanic, if you go into a glide kick, you will be able to move the left analog stick while you're in the middle of the glide kick to select targets and cause the game to go into slow motion. And this is all tailored to upgrades, so you can use batarangs, you can use the remote electric charge, you can use the back claw. I think you can also use freeze grenades as well. But I don't really use that mechanic much, and Batman Arkham Videos doesn't do the same. It's one of the most useless mechanics in this game because there's never really a situation that demands the use of that mechanic. The whole ability to strategically knock down enemies while in a glide kick animation. I mean, it could be useful during Predator encounters, but if you're approaching the Predator encounters in one specific way where you don't deal with so much RNG, you don't have to be so reliant upon that mechanic. So a large part of the upgrade system is tailored to that mechanic that is already pretty useless. So it's pretty easy to understand where you want to tailor your upgrades. You don't want to slot your upgrades into a pretty useless ability. Well, also, I left in this moment right here. So Batman is asking Alfred to deploy the Batwing, but this is the third time Alfred is reminding him that there are 2 radar towers and a long-range missile launcher on Founders Island. And he's already mentioned this twice, and yet Batman decided to make that quote. Like, it should have sunk into his head at this point that there are 2 radar towers and a long-range missile launcher. I guess Batman was a little dense just then, which is why I decided to leave it in. But the upgrade system is something I want to talk about, because I don't think it's as good as the upgrade system from Batman Arkham City. One of my main problems with the upgrade system in Batman Arkham Knight is that a lot of the abilities that are tied behind the upgrades are abilities that you've already purchased from Batman Arkham City. Like in Batman Arkham City, it was totally understandable why a lot of these abilities, like the Seek and Destroy ability, were behind the skill tree system because they were brand new abilities. You've never seen these abilities before in Batman Arkham Asylum. So locking such abilities, like such new abilities behind the skill tree system makes so much sense. But in Batman Arkham Knight, a lot of those abilities that you could buy in Batman Arkham City, you have to buy them again. And it just seems very counterintuitive to a game that should have been following the same exact format as Arkham City, where every single ability in the skill tree system was actually a new ability. But a large percentage of the upgrade system is tailored to abilities that you already managed to get in Arkham City. Like, all of these abilities that you had to buy in Arkham City should have been available to you right at the start of Arkham Knight. But for some reason, they make you rebuy all those abilities, and it just completely destroys any chance for Rocksteady to be creative with some new abilities. Because they devoted a significant portion of their time to just putting old skills behind the skill tree system, rather than actually designing new skills to put into the skill tree system, and that makes up 100% of the skill tree system, I just feel like it's a massive missed opportunity for this game. This game could have had a lot more, and I do agree that the combat and Predator upgrades are really cool, but a lot of the upgrades I feel in Batman Arkham Knight mainly enhance fundamental abilities, or you're just rebuying abilities that you had to buy previously in Arkham City. And from a story standpoint, it really doesn't make any sense for Batman to have to relearn abilities that he understood in Batman Arkham City. He should have all of those abilities at the start, because it makes a lot of sense given that he learned these abilities in Batman Arkham City. And not only that, but a lot of those upgrades in Batman Arkham City were necessary to balance out the combat so that you were avoiding a lot of the fundamental issues with Batman Arkham City's combat system. So it just seems rather stupid to me that they would try to make you rebuy those abilities that helped make the combat a lot more balanced. And resuming my tangent on the upgrade system, like, the game already makes it clear that the new suit enhances Batman in so many ways. The Batmobile has new abilities, given that it's a brand new mechanic in Arkham Knight. They should have devoted at least 95% of the upgrades to brand new abilities that actually felt tailored to the idea of having a new suit and the Batmobile. And also, they should have had more gadgets, more interesting gadgets, whereas a lot of the gadgets in Arkham Knight are gadgets that we've seen in Batman Arkham City. And then we have gadgets like the Disruptor, which, it's an enhanced version of the Disruptor we had in Arkham City and Arkham Origins, but it's still the Disruptor. I don't feel like there's a lot of new gadgets that Batman really brings to the playing field. I mean, aside from the voice synthesizer, but the voice synthesizer is kind of an inferior version of the Sonic Batarang, even though it has targeted capabilities. But I'll talk more about that. But my main point here being is, the upgrade system in Batman Arkham Knight doesn't feel as good as the upgrade system from Batman Arkham City. Arkham City's upgrade system actually felt expansive because a lot of the abilities were new, whereas in Arkham Knight's case, it just feels like a rehashing of old ideas because Rocksteady couldn't get creative with new abilities. And it feels like they only reintroduced the old abilities into the upgrade system for Batman Arkham Knight in order to make it pleasing at face value, because you have a lot of abilities that you're seeing with your eyes, and you're not realizing that a lot of those abilities are abilities you previously had in Arkham City, but that doesn't matter. As long as it's pleasing to the eyes of the consumer who actually purchased your game, that's perfectly fine in Rocksteady's mind. And I personally am not a big fan of it. And that's all I have to say about that. But this right here is a pretty funny Predator encounter. I'm sure you're looking at this and you're probably thinking, is this guy crazy for just staying in this area and dealing with this many enemies? And he's even letting himself be tracked by the detective mode scanner that enemy is using. Well, I had the idea of doing that when I wanted to get creative with explosive gel, because I was placing explosive gel at the bottom of the staircase and the top of the staircase, and then I just remembered how powerful the detective mode scanner is when the enemy actually detects you with it, because every single enemy just goes for you. And using this to my advantage, as well as how awkward the AI is in Batman Arkham Knight in the middle of Predator encounters, I was able to do a pretty creative strategy just then. And you have to make sure you have the upgrade where explosive gel instantly knocks out enemies. Place explosive gel specifically, not just like range explosive gel. But one thing I find very strange about that ability with the explosive gel is it only happens 3 times. You can't use this move like more than 3 times, even though there's no indication of this in the actual description of the upgrades. There's no piece of information within the description of that instant incapacitation of the explosive gel where it indicates that it stops being a one-hit incapacitation after 3 hits, after 3 uses of the explosive gel. So it seems like Rocksteady unintentionally created a counter to my ability to use the explosive gel on staircases. And what I mentioned before about staircases with the explosive gel is the enemies can recognize your explosive gel and they will shoot it. But because of the different change in planes, because there's a bottom level to the staircase and a top level of the staircase, and it's a flat plane, incline, and then a flat plane, the enemies are very slow to detect the explosive gel if you place them at certain parts of the staircase. So that is why I'm able to use that ability to my advantage to a greater degree. And using that alongside the detective mode scanner, I was able to do a pretty hilarious strategy for that section, which I managed to prepare perfectly for this walkthrough before I actually started it. And it was glorious. I take pride in finding that strategy for that entire area. But now we have this combat encounter right here before we finally bring the Batmobile onto Founders Island. And where would you say we are right now in the main story? Would you say we're roughly 50% of the way done with the story, and we're now getting access to Founders Island? I do think that's a little absurd that they would wait that long to unlock Founders Island and restrict so many of your activities through the Batmobile. I'm sure you're not thinking about this when you're just going through the story normally, but when you're thinking about the side activities and with the amount of stuff that the Batmobile is needed for, it definitely feels a little absurd that it would take that long to unlock all 3 islands. But we have this encounter with the missile launcher, which you'll see this enemy type in later encounters. But the strategy for dealing with this enemy right here is to shoot the side missile launchers first so that you can disable its ability to use them. And you'll want to use this geometry right over here as cover. So you'll want to dodge to the side the moment you see the missile lock function. And you'll need to shoot the missile with the Vulcan gun and avoid the rest of the missiles coming from the middle of this missile launcher. So I'm just trying to focus all of my shots on the side missile launchers, and that is it. And this is the end of this video, but here are some bloopers. So that right there is a really cheap spawn. Why does it place me so close to the enemies after I restarted the checkpoint and I had no time to react? And then watch this. I thought this was something only the militia did, but the thugs can do it as well. I made noise and I'm hiding on this gargoyle, but I mentioned that the enemies just have this tendency to look up and just spot you out of nowhere when you make noise and you just immediately retreat up to a gargoyle. So that's what got me killed. And then this right here is poor prioritization on the game's part. I'm trying to shoot this drone, but it's not prioritizing the 60mm cannon. It's prioritizing the riot rounds because there's a car right next to that drone. And because I'm preoccupied with trying to shoot this drone, I end up taking damage. Yeah, that is pretty silly that they would favor that kind of model with an automatic process for selecting weapons tailored to R2. But whatever, this is the end of this video. Stay tuned for the future parts. Thank you all for watching, and you take care now.